Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, the podcast for teachers who don't want to just survive teaching, but actually thrive. I'm Kim Lapre, and for those of you who don't know me, or if this is your first time, welcome. I'm a middle school English teacher in California, and this will be my 24th year of teaching. Wow, it's been a while. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on a podcast platform, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like this episode and do some form of subscribing or following, depending on where you're at. And if you're able to, like you can on YouTube and Spotify, could you leave me a comment letting me know how many years you've been teaching? Maybe you haven't started teaching yet, but either way, I'm always curious about the level of experience my audience has. So I would really appreciate it if you would do that. So at the time of this recording, many of you are heading back to work after winter break. And before I dive into this kind of heavy episode, as you're driving or maybe sitting in your classroom before students arrive, I want to start by setting some expectations clearly. This is not an episode meant to make you dread the year ahead, but it's also not an episode pretending that everything is fine and you can do it. It's about naming the factors that are shaping what we're seeing in our classrooms right now, especially around behavior, attention, so teachers can stop internalizing these things as a personal failure and start responding in ways that are actually sustainable. I mean, there's a lot of loud content online about education, and there's a lot of different takes about how kids are worse, how attention spans are shot, and how no one cares anymore. But most of that framing has left a lot of teachers feeling frustrated. We feel blamed or quietly questioning whether we're actually cut out for this. And that's not what I want to do here. What I want to do is zoom out and look at the conditions students have been growing up in and the conditions teachers have been teaching in, and then connect the dots between those conditions and what's showing up in our classrooms. Because my core belief about all of this is simple, even if it's uncomfortable and a little bit controversial. And here it is: students are not broken, they are simply responding to the world they're growing up in. When I finally understood that, I didn't sit there and use that to excuse their behavior, but instead, I stopped reacting to it blindly and stopped waxing poetic about how great it used to be. And that shift in perspective alone has really helped me to make teaching feel more manageable. And my hope is that by the end of this episode, you'll feel less alone in what you're teaching and more clear headed about how you want to respond, both for your students and for yourself. So, before we talk about, you know, attention spans, behavior, parents, admin, test scores, there's actually kind of like this bigger truth underneath all of it. And it's that students are not malfunctioning, they are behaving exactly like the adults around them. And when you look at what society, especially in America, looks like right now, what we're seeing in classrooms kind of makes sense. I mean, schools don't exist in a vacuum. Classrooms are a lot of times a mirror of the culture we're raising kids in. I mean, you see this in different areas around the country. You see it in the ideologies and the mores. It doesn't matter which country that you live in, but you can tell that whatever culture they're growing up in, they're raised in that area, it's reflected in how they act out in person. So the thing that's been really hard that I'm reading about and actually seeing locally is that behavior issues are more pervasive. Yes, we know that. But there's often a lack of accountability from students or parents. It's like, yes, the student is behaving badly in your class. Parents are like, eh. The student's like, whatever. And a lot of times there's no meaningful consequences from administration because They feel this need to make parents happy. And in a way, I can understand why admin want to keep parents off their backs. I mean, remote learning pulled education into public view like never before. I mean, parents felt like they saw how school, quote unquote, really works in our classrooms, even though, I mean, that wasn't normal school. A lot of us were just like thrown into it. And there are a lot of teachers who don't have anything digital prepared to administer to the students through online learning, even in that second year. And so, because parents got a peek into our classrooms, this also created this wave of armchair experts, and parents were definitely speaking disrespectfully about teachers, which, when they do that at home, it bleeds directly into student attitudes and behavior. So there's a lot of finger pointing at public school education. There's a lot of criticism by people who don't understand what's actually happening inside our four walls. And that criticism doesn't stay inside staff meetings or policy discussions, it moves into people's homes and online into group chats and comment sections and dinner tables. Students hear this, they absorb it, and they learn from it. And because when adults model this kind of cynicism and disrespect and basically contempt towards teachers and education, contempt towards each other as adults, I mean, we've seen that. Kids don't just notice that, they replicate it. We used to have these cultural norms where even if we thought something cruel, we policed ourselves. We discouraged open hatred. We shamed bigotry and any kind of dehumanization. That norm is gone. Adults openly say hateful, bigoted things to each other and face to face. People are being persecuted in America or detained based on the color of their skin. I mean, violence is encouraged, it's celebrated, or even excused, and rage is rewarded. Cruelty is what gets people to click or stay in an app, which of course feeds the algorithm, and basically, uncivil behavior has become normalized. This is the future we as a society are raising to become our future leaders. I mean, students aren't broken, they're just paying attention and they see the way that the adults act as permission to act the same way. So here's the thing. Since students are watching how adults respond to stress and pressure, I wanted to share how I respond in my own classroom. And this is what has made teaching during this time more sustainable for me. So the first is structure, just a real emphasis on structure. I mean, we know that students need routine. If they can predict what will happen next, the nervous system can stay more regulated. So, consistent lesson formats, like doing a certain type of warm up at the start of every class, having certain activities happen in the same order almost each time. And as much as we might crave more freedom and creativity in our teaching, like I get it, I find that doing the creative stuff within predictable containers of time or routines or within the usual way of practicing skills, that tends to keep students in check. So it's like they know that we're doing this type of activity, and I can just be a little more creative by adding some more engaging elements to it. And because the expectations are consistent, when you have to address their behavior, it's no longer personal. It's also not negotiable and it's not debatable. It's basically the line of, look, this is the routine. This is how we do this. And this is when we do this. You're not doing what's expected at this time. So these are the consequences. Another thing that I found that I have to do is explicitly teach focus as a skill. But when my students are like in the flow on an assignment, I call out when I see them sort of like, phasing or spacing out or falling asleep or just struggling in general. And I tell them, I know you're bored. I know this is hard, but just push through for 3 more minutes. And that 3 more minutes gives them an endpoint. And the 3 minute mark, give or take, I switch gears. And that usually involves having them share what they wrote with their group. And then to make it more interesting, sometimes I'll mix up the order in which they read to their group members by things like you're going to share an order of shortest to longest hair, things like that. So it's just having them change gears, even just for a little bit, even for just 60 seconds, really helps in terms of teaching them how to focus for a certain amount of time and put their all into that amount of time. But I also normalize boredom. I'll even tell them, yeah, you know what? I know this part's boring, but you need to learn how to do it because we're going to be doing XYZ next week. So just lock in and you'll struggle less later. Teaching in shorter chunks also really helps. Sometimes I found that you actually have to plan these or set a timer for yourself because, we can get carried away when we're in the middle of something. Otherwise, even something that we think should be fun, like group work, it can kind of start to go off the rails because they've been doing it for a long period of time and they haven't switched modes. So, if you can just like plan some shorter chunks or just some ways to break it up, I found that that has really helped. This is probably something that a lot of you are already doing. But if you're finding it harder and harder to maintain the attention of students, you might actually have to do it more. I found that building in movement and reset moments definitely helps get them back on track. So if I can catch them before I completely lose them, then that's even better. So you got to build it in. So something as simple as having students stack all of their papers in their group together and then having them nominate someone to bring it to you. That alone is a reset. Just anytime that they're just switching gears. Also, if you use timers or like I said, give them a time frame. If you refer visually to the agenda, maybe you have it written on the board. That also helps them manage their mental load and also holds you accountable to ensure that they get that kind of like mental and physical break that they need. Something else that I've always done but have been more intentional is giving grace without lowering the bar. So I started to integrate low stakes activities into my class. And this allows me to offer emotional support without removing the rigor. So, for example, I decided that I was not going to grade the warm ups. And you might think, well, then students won't do it. They will if you build in ways to check for understanding. But basically, I use the warm ups as an opportunity to review, to clear up misunderstandings and confusion, and maybe even allowing students to get some time to just like get mentally set for your class. I found this to be really important for my students with ADHD who need a few minutes just to be fully present. So maybe they're not really getting the most out of your warm up during that time, but what you're getting out of it is a student who is more present and ready to learn because they had those few moments to get set. During that warm up, I'll engage them with a mix of something fun, like we do Would You Rather, which the kids think is great because they get to talk about their opinion and maybe add something funny. And then I also balance it with sentence correction. And so, both ways, they're still practicing skills and concepts I teach while they get to be silly for a bit. And I also find that encouraging retakes and revisions helps students take risks, especially when they're not confident about an assignment. And this goes with normalizing mistakes too. We want our students to make mistakes, but it only works if you know how to tell them that they made that mistake without humiliating them. So for me, some things that I'll do if they answer incorrectly, I'll just make this like eek face, like "Eek," say, "Are you sure? Oh no." Or another thing I'll say, actually, if I had said X, Y, and Z, then you'd definitely be right. So I'm not calling them out for being wrong. I'm saying, wow, in this other instance, that was the correct answer. Or another way I'll say it is, I can see why you got that because X, Y, and Z, but you're close. You want to try again? And if I'm randomly calling on students and one student, they're like really struggling, Then all of a sudden I'll stop and I'll say, okay, everyone, 30 seconds in your group, discuss what you think the correct answer is. That gives that student time to actually check if they're right or to check why they're wrong, to get the correct answer. And then I call on them again, and they, of course, say the correct answer, and it builds confidence and it builds trust in me. So, those are just some of the things that I do to build the relationships with my students and build trust. And as a result, I get more buy in. Another thing that I think is really important during this time, when it's just so hard, is to find at least one other teacher who you can vent to. It would be awesome if they were in your school, but if not, I get it. But you want to be choosy. You want to make sure that when you find someone with whom you can vent, there's someone who actually listens and not someone who is going to gaslight you or try to one up you how like they had it worse. Like, yes, they can vent to you too, but there's just something about finding someone who will actively listen. And it makes all the difference when you have that difficult student, that difficult parent, difficult admin. You know what I mean? It's just really important to find those people who you can always rely on and who you can also provide the same kind of support. And if you don't have anyone in your school, maybe you're new or maybe the environment's toxic, then online forums like Reddit, Facebook groups, they can be really helpful, but just be careful to not let it become like this echo chamber for frustration. You will be validated, but sometimes it can actually just like amplify more negativity than provide perspective. So I don't want to end this by telling you how to feel about teaching right now. I just want to be clear about this. What you're seeing in your classroom, it makes sense when you look at the conditions that the students and all of the adults, including us, have been living in. My intention of this reframe is to assure you that you don't need to fix the system or absorb every behavior as a personal failure, because I see a lot of teachers who just think that these problems reflect how they are as a teacher. Especially hoping that you'll see that the majority of the negative behaviors you're seeing aren't actually personal, even if they hurt. I recently had a student come up to me with a smirk, maybe even a sneer, and say, I heard from other students that you're the worst teacher. She just had that like Veruca Salt type of attitude. And I smiled sympathetically. I didn't miss a beat. And I said, oh, that's too bad for them. And inside, my initial reaction was to be offended. But then I remembered my interactions with their parent, and I knew that the student was just parroting, mimicking that parent. So a lot of it isn't personal. Now, knowing all this isn't going to necessarily make it feel better what's happening, but honestly, all we can do is make choices that keep our classrooms steady and our nervous systems intact and regulated, especially if we want to make it in this profession until we retire. That's what's gonna happen for me. I'm sticking it out. I still love it, but this is how I manage to still love it despite everything going on. So I'd love to hear your opinions on this topic as well as your experiences. I mean, what's happening for you in your classrooms, both good and bad? Because I know it's not bad everywhere, but let's share and help each other out. So be sure to leave a comment if you can. Thank you for being here with me today, and I will see you next time.